In addition to my kind of engineering hat, I also have a cloud operations hat. I actually run our data centers. And as the guy who runs the data centers, when you tell me that we've deployed 45,000 lab instances to support the labs, like we did, I have a few questions, like, are people really using them? What are they doing with them? Are some of them busy, some of them not too busy? Do we really need 45,000? Maybe 42 would have done it. So I immediately looked at this app, and I said, you know, we really need to track some metrics from all these instances. They shouldn't just be floating around doing things. They should be floating around doing things and telling me what they're doing. It's a fairly classic IoT case. So I'm actually going to bring up a couple of my friends, Joe Davis and Mike Lentz, to show you how they added that functionality to that application on top of metric base. So come on up, guys. Oh, we're doing high five.
High five. Good morning. Thanks, Pat. Good morning, everyone. We're glad you're here. It's day 3. You survived, which is good. As Pat mentioned, I'm Mike, by the way. Sorry, that's Joe, so we know. As Pat mentioned, you know, the Internet of Things and big data. I think we're all familiar with these buzzwords. But if we take a moment and we peel back the hype on these industry trends, what we find as their common foundation is something really important called time series. The reason Joe and I are here this morning is that we've developed a new big data platform technology that solves for time series. So over the next few minutes, we're going to talk about 3 things. First, what is time series data, and why is it so important? Second, we're going to talk about how we solved for time series data on the ServiceNow platform. And third, and probably most important, is how can you use time series data for your business to make good business decisions? So let's take a look.
All right, so the first thing that we wanted to talk about was kind of the relationship between IoT and time series. You know, we solved, it's a really abstract concept. We solved a really big part of it, so we want to kind of show you what that looks like. IoT in a nutshell, I think we're all pretty familiar with, in this room at least, right? You take a device, you take a machine, some sensor, and you hook it up to the internet. When you do that, it starts sending data continuously. We all know some examples of this. You know, we have servers sending CPU and memory. You have your IoT device, your smart thermostat. It might be like average temperature, power consumption. You have things like IoT industrial machines, like wind turbines. They're going to be doing things like blade speed and kilowatts per hour. Time series is tracking all of these metrics over time. That's really what it's about. Now, IoT comes into play when you have lots of metrics. You want to track them very often, and you have a lot of devices. Think, 1 million, 10 million, 100 million. So IoT, it's created this explosion of time series data. Now, time series, it's not just about IT. It's used in every industry. In the utility space, you're going to use time series to do things like predicting equipment failures. I think Dave talked about this on the day 1 keynote. You're going to try to prevent a problem from ever happening. In the retail space, time series is really important. You're going to use it to do things like track seasonal spending and forecasting inventories. You got to make sure you have the right product, the right place, at the right time.
Yeah, that's right, Joe. In the healthcare industry, time series is used to measure patient wait times. And this enables hospitals to augment the staffing of their doctors and nurses to reduce that time. And in our world of IT and cloud infrastructure, we use time series to measure infrastructure resources. This allows us to predict the impacts of new products and services on things like infrastructure capacity and performance. No matter the industry or the application, time series data is used as a decision support system. Time series data is gold. And it's gold because it allows you to understand the past and then predict the future, enabling you to make business decisions off of information versus speculation. So now that we have this baseline understanding of what is time series and why it's so important, Joe, let's talk about how we solve this within the ServiceNow platform.
So this was it's a really hard engineering challenge. We've already established you have these huge machine-generated data streams. And so, but you wanted a solution on the platform. You've asked us for this. Many application developers and customers have asked us for this. So we're really excited to announce a brand new product. We have a new product called Metric Base, and that's ServiceNow's IoT big data platform technology. And it allows you to write platform applications that can store and operate against time series data. It does three things really well, and so we want to kind of go under the covers a little bit and talk to you about what it does really well so that when you go to use it, you get the most out of the product. The first thing, it's pretty obvious. It has to handle large volumes of data very efficiently. Think of this as high throughput. Metric Base has high throughput. In real numbers, what we've been talking about and testing internally is 160,000 values a second. That turns out to be about 14 billion data points a day you can send to a single instance of Metric Base, and it can handle it no problem.
Now, just hold on a second. Like, I know it's the morning after the big party. The lights are a little bit low, but I hope you guys caught that. That's billion with a capital B data points per day. We've truly engineered Metric Base to be enterprise scale.
So, it wasn't viable to build an application on the platform that operated at scales of that magnitude. So we were really excited to solve that part of the problem, but obviously we didn't stop there. The second thing that we solved here was once we receive all this data, we had to make sure that we could efficiently store it. And you in the audience, you might not care about that part. Like, hey, that's our problem. You don't care. But it's actually kind of important for you as well, because if we can efficiently store all that data that we just received, we can do things like backups and restores and clones and queries and make those all fast. So that's what we did. We used a fraction of the disk space to store all of that data on disk.
Yeah, the last thing we wanted to do with Metric Base was simply invent yet another big data solution. And we had to address those operational problems that Joe just mentioned. So what we first did was use Metric Base on our internal big data stream. Now, we use this big data stream to collect metrics on every ServiceNow instance around the world. And needless to say, we collected a ton of data. And we were able to take a 35-node HBase cluster, shrink it down to one server, running under 40%. I got a little bit of my cloud back.
You're welcome. So the third thing that this technology, this product does really well is it's going to give you fast, ad hoc, real-time queries. So as soon as we receive data, you can query for it. That's obviously really important. It's not just about storing lots of data. You have to be able to quickly get access to it in really unique ways.
So Joe, I think we all know what a query is. I mean, every single one of us work on the ServiceNow platform. How do we think differently about a time series query?
Okay, so there's one thing that's really unique about a time series query, and it involves time. So a regular query, we're all pretty familiar with a task query, let's say, right? You do a query against task where the number is int123, for example. A time series query, what you really want to be able to say is, hey, give me the top 5 servers, for example, that have an average CPU greater than 90% in the last, say, 2 hours. You're looking for problematic servers. You have a CPU issue. And you really want to be able to do that all in one place. And before this product, you might have had to go to different places to kind of answer that question, but not anymore. What we did, which is really different than other things you're going to see out there, is we baked time series right into the CMDB. And it's pretty obvious why we did that. Most of you in the audience have implemented CMDB, or you're planning on implementing the CMDB. When you think about what did you put in the CMDB, you put things like servers and infrastructure and applications and IoT devices and sensors. And we've already kind of talked about all of those things. They generate time series data. So it makes perfect sense for us to add Metric Base, integrate it into the CMDB so that you can take all those the context, the data, the relationships that you have defined in the CMDB and immediately get value out of all the data that you're collecting from time series so that you can answer these questions all in one place. Now, in this model, really the CMDB, it's more than just infrastructure now. It's more than just current state. In this new model, we really look at the CMDB as being the database for the Internet of Things. It's really the database of things.
Yeah. And we wanted Metric Base to be a simple way to implement time series within ServiceNow. We've taken the power of your CMDB and we've combined it with the power of time series. And we're really excited about how this product is going to transform your business. The next step is to apply time series to an application, our lab application. So we collected metrics like response time and transactions and user logins on all the lab instances for K17. So Joe, let's talk through how easy it is to implement time series on the ServiceNow platform.
So we're going to do some demos here now, and we're going to show you how easy it is to build a ServiceNow IoT app. And there's really 3 steps that you have to remember here, and they're all really easy, so pay attention. Don't blink. They're going to be very easy and very quick, actually. You're going to create a metric. We're going to show collecting data for the metric that we just created, and then we're going to show how to leverage that data to make a decision with the stuff that we just collected. So let's start by creating a metric, and let's see what that looks like.
Yeah, and a metric is simply a value that's collected and trended over time. So something like server CPU or response time.
OK, so let's go ahead and show the instance here. Now, this is the new metric screen. Okay, this is when you use metric base. This is what you're going to see when you go to create metrics. If you've created a table or a field, this is probably really familiar. The first thing that you're going to have to do is define a label. This is what the user interface is going to display when you add this to like a list view. You also have to give it a metric name. Think of this as a programmatic field name. This is what you're going to use if you're writing script, if you're using a REST API. This is how you store data and you retrieve data. There's some other options here. You have to choose the CMDB table name, and there's some other things you can do. But for our example, we're going to go ahead and take the defaults. You can change these for your use cases and your application. But for us, we're going to go ahead and finish creating this metric and submit that form.
So Joe, you created a metric by filling out 2 fields and clicking submit.
We did work really hard to make that really easy. I don't know that we could have made that any easier. So the second step is you have to collect data. This is really where the time series kicks in, right? So we just created a metric. We had the ability to store data now. So how do you get data up into the field that we just created? There's a couple different ways. If your data is behind a firewall, then you send it through the mid server. That one's pretty obvious. The second way is we have some REST APIs that you can call. Now, in the application that we're talking about here, this K17 lab management application, we just use the REST API. We collected 100 metrics every minute, and we did that across 45,000 instances.
Right.
And if you do the math, in a few days of knowledge, what you're going to see is that's 1.6 billion data points that we collected that we have access to, insight into these instances in terms of what's going on, and it's just ready to access.
Yeah, so we've collected billions of data points on all of these lab instances. And the next step is really to visualize it. Let's start visualizing all this data. So one of the metrics we collected on the lab instances was response time. So Joe, can we jump back into the instance and take a look at the response time metric and see what it shows us?
So let's go ahead and come into the list of lab instances in the CMDB. Again, metric base integrated with the CMDB, so you're generally going to access time series through the CMDB. And here we have a list of instances. I'm going to go ahead and select the very first lab. And what you see here is 200 instances, about 200 instances in every lab. I want to point out we've already configured this list view to include the response time. And really, the response time, it's all about user experience, performance. How long does it take to load a page? We're probably pretty familiar with how important this metric is. It's a really important business metric. One thing I also want to point out there is you're seeing this time series in the list view. It's a single value. For those of you in the audience, you might be kind of wondering, well, I thought time series was a bunch of values that, you can configure these in the list view to show the last value, the max, the min. It's really up to you. Just at least get some data there. We've chosen the last in this case, but let's go ahead and take a look at what the actual time series data is that we've collected. What you're seeing here is for every instance in that lab, the response time over the duration of the lab.
Now, this is a really pretty chart. It's got lots of colors. We can kind of see when the lab started and when the lab ended, but it really doesn't tell us anything. Joe, let's dig in a little bit more.
You can do some really powerful things with time series. You can do things like take the average across all of the different series that you have. And what you're really seeing here is for that lab that we just looked at, for those 200 different series, here's the average response time. Here's the average user experience for this particular lab.
Yeah, so this is starting to show us a little bit more information out of all this data we collected. But as I said at the beginning of our conversation, the power of time series really comes into making a business decision. So for us, we have 2 hosting providers for all the lab instances at K17. Joe, let's compare performance between the 2 providers, and ultimately I want to decide which provider I'm going to go with for K18.
All right, so what you want to see is between provider 1 and provider 2, who's faster, who has a better response time. It's really easy for us to answer that. It's really easy for us to answer that because we have the list of instances in the CMDB, and one of the attributes that we have on those instances is hosting provider. And so we have some associated with provider 1 and some associated with provider 2. And we obviously collected response time as we talked about. So first thing I'm going to do here is I'm going to go ahead and group the instances by the 2 hosting providers that we have.
Provider 1, provider 2, that looks good.
From there, it's really easy to get the answer that we're looking for, which is asking metric-based to give us an aggregate average response time across those 2 different groups. Now, what you're seeing here is provider 1 is the blue line, and it's below provider 2. Now, remember, smaller is better for response time. It's a little bit like golf. And so provider 1 is faster for this use case than provider 2.
Right. So metric base allows me to understand and quickly see that provider 1 has about 25% better response time than provider 2. My business decision is very simple. Next year at K18, we're going with provider 1.
The data makes it pretty clear.
You have time series data throughout your organization. And remember, that data is gold. It allows you to understand the past and then predict the future. Metric base makes it very simple to create, implement, and manage time series within ServiceNow with 0 code. And this is going to enable you to make business decisions with information.
Thank you.